So when we started putting together this workshop, we had a lot of interest from Department of Fisheries and Oceans, and we were really excited by that because DFO is a huge component of science in Canada, particularly aquatic science. Many of us have very close connections with DFO, and DFO scientists are embedded within all of our networks. And Dave was particularly enthusiastic, and we're really excited to have participation from him and his group. And we asked if he would be interested in actually giving a talk at our workshop and participating, because we know that you have tons of experience, and a lot of people have questions about what it's like to work with DFO, and how can we have these amazing jobs with DFO. And we asked Dave, and he graciously agreed to give this presentation for us. So we're thrilled to have you guys participating. Thank you so much for supporting our workshop, and thanks so much for agreeing to share your experiences and give a talk with us today.
All right, so yeah, that was a thank you for that introduction. So I work over at the Bedford Institute of Oceanography, which is the Maritime's head office for fisheries and oceans, in the population ecology division. So I've been there 10 years, and I work on marine threats to Atlantic salmon, and before that I worked on shrimp stock assessment for 5 years for the Eastern Scotian Shelf. So I wasn't sure on the timing of when I would get to show off my gear over there. If anybody doesn't know who this is, we probably can't be friends. I can't do the mullet anymore, but this is one of my heroes. So anyways, it's just something I wanted to throw in, and I think some of you got a chance to look at it, but that's the field fish anesthetic delivery system, which derives originally, the idea came from DFO course that was put on to try to achieve consistency in fish tagging methods between, first specifically, salmon telemetry projects that DFO is doing on Atlantic salmon. So the course was put on at UPEI, and they showed us this fish anesthetic delivery system based on that you plug everything into the wall. And I thought, geez, wouldn't that be great to have that you could take out with you away from electricity first, and then it evolved to be, well, what if you could just put it on your back and have everything you need? And the only place, my work is not as intrepid as I would lead you to believe with that system, but sometimes just simple practical things, like we tagged on the Gaspereau River, and you know, forgive the earlier talk about the importance of communicating with a non-scientific audience, but sometimes you just want to get your work done. So we were tagging on this river with a busy hiking trail, and the first day of tagging, I'm trying to concentrate on what I'm doing, and there's one after another person coming, hey, what are you doing over there? And asking you questions, and I'm like, what tag number? And it gets complicated. So I just put that in my backpack and crossed the river, and then I just waved. So it has various applications. Not all of them are, you know, commando style. So I was asked to give a talk on sort of two topics, and one was on how to communicate with DFO management. And that sort of became a telling question to ask, because it sort of became clear to me that maybe there was some lack of clarity on what DFO management was. So I sort of had to ask the question, do you mean resource management? Or do you mean management, like the bean counters? Or do you mean Ottawa? So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and then the second part will be the sort of insider's track on some of the things I've learned as an employee, but also as somebody hiring people on how to get a job with DFO. So one thing that's sort of important to remember, and you'll see it when I talk a little bit about the regions of DFO, but the type of work that some of us here do in particular is kind of unusual, especially on the Atlantic side of the country. So a lot more of the work that's done is at sea on marine species, and is often some version of fairly pure stock assessment to provide science advice for commercial fisheries and bycatch and things like that. So if you're like me, I mean, I get seasick in a hammock. So when I first started working for DFO, anybody who knew me was like, why would you do that, and why don't you go to Winnipeg? So I did put in my time. I managed to somehow smile in most of those pictures, but there's other ones. So anyways, that is just something important to remember, is that depending what you're working on in your graduate work, a lot of the work that DFO does is linked to a mandate to provide science advice for harvested species. So it's sometimes somewhat different, and sometimes the process of it is distinctly less academic than what you're used to. It doesn't mean there aren't academic opportunities, but I just wanted to flag that. So the structure of the talk is I'm going to talk a little bit about the first section, how to communicate with DFO management, which I put in quotes because of these uncertainties about what level of management we're talking about. So I'm going to talk about our communications office, our sort of media relations, which is interesting in the context of this morning's talk about SciComms and how different it is and how different it can be under different governments, of which I've experienced two very different ones in my short career. And then the communicating with science and research, which is, I think, probably where the question came from, and it's the aspect I'm most able to provide some feedback on. And then I just wanted to mention specifically what resource management is, and then what the overall management of DFO is, and where you may or may not want to be communicating with them. And then another part of DFO you might communicate with is the CSS Office, the Canadian Science Advice Secretariat. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit. And then HR did get wind. I didn't know this was going to be broadcast originally, but I'm still just going to go ahead. So HR got wind that this was going to happen, and they said, well, we should go and we should do it, and because maybe it's a good recruitment event. And I took the liberty of telling them it was canceled, so they wouldn't come. But they. So if you guys wanted that, sorry, I took it elsewhere. But I think it's because if there's one thing I learned while my brain was on fire the last couple of days, is you are all like really smart people. So you probably can go to YouTube and put in how to get a job with the Government of Canada. You could Google. I think you can handle it, right? There's no GitHub even involved. So that, because what they suggested to me is, oh, here's a little video you could show, and here's a website you could go to. And I'm like, that's not going to be useful. So what I'm going to focus on is the second part, which I call the real skinny. So some of the things that are, some of them bridging a little bit on things I maybe shouldn't be as honest about, but let's do it anyways. So for regional considerations, I mean, one thing that sometimes people don't know, if you look at these maps, those are the DFO regions, and you can see that we're really heavy on the Atlantic coast with a lot of different regions. So that's replication of all that different organizational structure and management and research programs separately in Quebec, Newfoundland, Labrador, Gulf region, and Maritimes. So I don't know if there's anything I can do about that. I'll try a little farther away. So it's relevant because the sort of complexity of making connections. If you think you may want to live in Atlantic Canada and you may want to work for DFO, there's a lot more people you need to be speaking to than, you've got a great contact that can probably get you in the door to talk to people in Winnipeg, and you can see you've got a big part of the country that you can work in. So it is different across the country, as are a lot of things about it. So it's all DFO, but the way things are done and the emphasis on stock assessment versus like on the Pacific coast, it's, you could almost call it the Department of Salmon at times, right? It's a different ballgame than it is elsewhere. So that's just something important to realize. And then NHQ, that's national headquarters, that's Ottawa. And I'm not going to talk a lot about how to interact with Ottawa because I tend to avoid it. But that's a lot of important things happen there, I'm sure. But now our opportunities at our level to interact at that level are pretty slim. It can be really interesting if you are invited. It's a real eye-opener to go and see how people at that level, what kinds of things they're thinking about and how different it is than what we're doing day to day. So yeah, so our communications themselves, we have a communications office in every region and a national office. And so that's some along the lines of what we heard this morning. There's their page. They've got all the social media stuff. So if you're looking to communicate with communications, that could be in a couple of contexts. So that could be that you have done some research and you want DFO to know about it. So I get emails from our communications, anything to do with Atlantic salmon, work that's happening, or a cage that's ruptured that shows up in the media, and sometimes it's researchers who have reached out and flagged something to communications, and I get it in my email. And so that can be somewhere that if you contact them with research news or questions, you can be involved that way. It was interesting in listening to this morning's talk about how much this encouragement with scientific communications to just put yourself out there, and that is one thing that can be quite different when you're working for DFO. Generally, you do need to involve communications, and although under the current government you don't necessarily have to. So I had a CBC reporter contact me last spring, and he came out and he interviewed Daniela and I, and he spent the day, and communications wasn't involved, and that was okay. 7 or 8 years ago, that would not have been okay. So that changes over time. But there is, the year before that, for example, we made several days of work right in the crux of my really busy field season, tagging Atlantic salmon smolts during the striped bass spawning run. And it's a predation study using predation tags, and they were pretty new at the time. And they made this beautiful video, and this is an NHQ comment that's now disappeared to going on 2 years now. And I don't know who has a problem with it or what I said or what I did in the video. I don't think there's anything, but you know, so we don't always have the freedom, and there may be good reasons why things get held up, and sometimes they're not very good reasons, but they're practical ones. We have translation policies and things like that. So our communications can be a little cumbersome at times, but that is a conduit in. This was just don't read the slide at all, except to say that that sort of reminds you of the regional structure and the duplication. So if you put in DFO org chart on Google, which we've already established as well within your skills, you could do that, and you see down to the regional director generals. And I know who my regional director general is. Above that, it changes, cabinets get shuffled, the influence on me it's not really important for me to track. Probably where things get real for an on-the-ground biologist or research scientist is with the director of science in your region. So that's Alain Vézina in our case. And so that's kind of the highest level where I would have a direct interaction. Other people like Fred or Sarah or Shelley Denny from UINR, like those, at that level, there may be communications higher up for big funding proposals and big initiatives and things. But in terms of the boots on the ground people, it's usually up to your director of science. So this is just an example of, this is the population ecology division. So one of a number of divisions under in the science branch in Maritimes. So just in terms of relationships a little bit, so we have a division manager, and then there are sections. So we have 4 sections, and so population ecology division, that's not likely to get renamed or changed in a hurry, but the sections within the population, they'll decide that shrimp is now going to be paired up with lobster because those scientists are working together on a collaborative agreement and it's easier. So there's a fair bit of shuffling. Salmon tends to stand on its own, but we've been diadromous before, so striped bass and sturgeon and things mixed in. Now those species are separated out, so there's a little bit of flux at the section level. And we will get into the job sections, the kinds of jobs that you might have. So the person who's the salmon section manager, so speaking of management, that person is very heavily involved in administration of science. So they need an understanding of the science that's happening within their unit and the resources that are needed. And they're generally a BI4, so they're a biologist, and we'll talk about those levels. And then, so within the salmon section, for example, in this example, we have the Inner and Outer Bay of Fundy Assessment Unit, the Southern Uplands and Eastern Cape Breton Assessment Unit, we have a genetics unit, we have biodiversity facilities, and I magically managed to leave my own unit out of there, and I kind of, that's because it's new, so I'm the Marine Threats Unit, and you're looking at it. Right now, it's one person. Whereas, like, the biodiversity facilities are dozens. So there's a lot of different needs within those units and a lot of staff turnover and crossing back and forth. So within those units, there are generally biologists are usually BI2 or BI3. There's really nowhere in there to work as a BI4 without going up to the section management level. And then there are research scientists who can be levels 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that's kind of the closest thing we have to an academic professorship are the research scientists. So an important distinction is that there are opportunities based on your academic progress to go from one level to the next. So you can, if you're productive enough as a research scientist, you can go right up to that's what you'll hear, res. You'll hear the terms of res doc. That's a document. It's a paper that's published in the CSS office, and then a res sci or a res as a research scientist. Then there are technicians. I don't know how they came up with EG, but if you look for a job and you see EG 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, those are technicians. And then there's other staff. You'll see GL man, which is general labor, and then there's all kinds of other levels in there. So in communicating with I mentioned the CSS office, so I'll talk about that a little bit. And then the other place that management comes in is in resource management. So those are the people usually, depending on the size, so like a lobster, there might be 2 or 3 of them because of the size of the fishery and the way it's divided up and the money and everything that's involved. But for salmon, there's one person, and his job is to, I only joined his lines to IBOF, to the 2 assessment units, so he interacts with all of us, but his job is really to take the science advice that's provided on and make management decisions. And in his job is much more open in terms of considering socioeconomic and cultural aspects of that. So, for example, for First Nations, a common conduit of communication with DFO management would be through the resource manager, because that is the person who has that as a big part of their mandate to consider First Nations issues in the way that science advice is interpreted in the making of decisions. So when you're thinking about trying to communicate with DFO, I guess you really have to think about what your goals are. Are you trying to collaborate? Do you want to be co-supervised and get your hands on DFO data and resources? Do you... I put that one in based on... I changed this one yesterday. I didn't mention it during the talk about NSERC grants, but in terms of funding, I mean, I actually thought of it at the time. That's a great time to already have relationships in place with DFO, because sometimes the way the work cycle happens at DFO, we don't make progress as quickly as we could like, and we end up sitting on quite a bit of data that taxpayers paid for. And I mean, that's certainly something I often have around is data and projects, and so I came over here in this case and I contacted Glenn Crossan, and that's how I ended up co-supervising Daniela. So as I said, I'm an army of one, so I have no staff, so I work with Daniela, but then I have other money for expensive tags and receivers and boats and trucks and things like that. So there can be good opportunities there, but like any of these relationships that we talked about this morning is fostering them and communicating early. It was one interesting thing I noticed with the Tyson was telling us about the tenets of working with First Nations, and I think actually if you go back to that presentation and you reread those, like the older I get, the more I realize my grandmother was right about everything, right? If you read quite a few of those, they're like, treat others as you would like to be treated. That's kind of what a lot of them are, right? Don't just come at the last minute and stuff something in my face. Talk to me about it early. Involve me. Care about what I have to say. We all want that. So that goes, of course, a different reason for it, but all those aspects, they're kind of life skills that if you want to communicate with DFO, you would be applying them. And I would suggest, I think most of what we would be talking about is actual fulsome collaboration on projects or access to data. That's what comes up quite a bit. And my suggestion there would be to be working at the leads of those units. So people like me and the leads of each of those units, they're the people who kind of have the connection to know what the needs are, what their resources are. They're the ones who understand what level of QA/QC has been applied to data. If you just make a data request at a higher level for a pull from a data set, it's a little bit different with telemetry data because we have OTN helping us ensure a certain quality of the data. But some of the assessment data, if you just pull from it without talking to the assessment leads, there's all kinds of aspects of survey design that introduce biases. You need to understand all those things, and it's if you're going and it's a time commitment from the person you're asking it from. So if you have an existing relationship, it'll go a long way to getting what you want. I called this one "Mind the Mandate" because it's something that I've learned over time is that the difference between academic goals and government mandate and deliverables for regulatory purposes. So we have a lot of things. Even though I don't work on stock assessment, there's a certain, everybody's jobs are cyclical. There's end of fiscals in every organization. But in stock assessment in particular, if you're interacting with stock assessment scientists, you need to know that they really do work on not necessarily an annual cycle. There are different depths of stock assessment that are done. So there are just status updates, sometimes yearly, using a very established method. Then there's full stock assessments if things are really changing, and then there's something called a framework, which is when they say, I want to talk about and review this new model that I want to apply to this. So people are working on this cycle, but there are certain things that happen once a year that really make government scientists really busy. And so that's what I call this regulatory workflow. So many of you apply for permits for things. So if that has to do with salmon, I see those. So a lot of my time from January to March is reviewing those permits, any requests for introductions and transfers. Aquaculture is a big thing right now, various funding proposals, and then ad hoc science requests that come in for, in my world, a big one is a siting of aquaculture sites. So I may think that I'm going to sit down for the next month and do this. Wrong. This other thing will come up, and so again, that's not unique to government work, but it's very prominent in government work, and you should just keep it in mind when communicating and looking to collaborate and asking for things, what other people have on the go and what their priorities are. The other way I find it sort of important is that sometimes you can have government science done at a level to meet a regulatory priority. So we have a regulatory responsibility to provide science advice, which is usually requested through formal means, would be through the CSS Office. So they will say, we want to know what the potential implications of this action are on this stock or species. And so we may do the science work and answer that question, and then we have a shifting priority on to the next thing. And these are the types of data that are sometimes sitting there with a lot more opportunity to be taken farther, and they're not necessarily capitalized on. So it's worthwhile to have relationships as an academic with people who have access to these data, because very often, if you have a good relationship, you'll know that there are people who wish they had time to just ignore all those regulatory things and sit down and take this further to the next level. And a lot of people don't mind at all if you're the one to do that. So there's that, the fiscal year cycle I mentioned, and then just the realities, which I've kind of alluded to a few times, of political cycles under different governments. So what are the fulsome priorities under different governments, and then even how they change under majority or minority governments in terms of how quickly things move or don't move. We talked quite a bit about data, and we, especially over the last few years, the Government of Canada is moving towards open data policies, and we're progressing ... because, as is often the case, it's such a huge thing when they start taking an inventory of the data that are sitting around in a not very open way. And some of them, they'll say, well, okay, well, we need to make that open. Oh, but wait. There's all these reasons why you can't just make it open, because there's these intricacies of the data and how it was collected, or there's people possessive of it or whatever. So they tend to be looking often for low-hanging fruit to say, yep, we're meeting this mandate, we've made data available, and tracking data has been one of those low-hanging fruit, so they're able to say, that's great, it's publicly available, and we're documenting it, and we're putting it into OTN, and there's an established protocol. But this is a real thing. The corporate knowledge of the QA/QC that's been applied to the data, how to write the queries to extract data. Sometimes it's stored in really archaic databases that you're not going to be able to work with it, and you shouldn't necessarily trust the data directly without that expert opinion on where it came from, and that a different vessel was used that year, and it's not necessarily captured that happened, so there may be gear changes along the way and things. So again, that's where that communication is really important. And then privacy laws, that's one that sometimes you think, well, why can't we do this? And with commercial fishing data in particular, there's a certain level of resolution within which you can't share logbook data, for example, because if it narrows things down so much that there are too few commercial fishermen represented, then you could put in the request for the data, narrow it down, and you would know, well, that's Erica. I now know all her hotspots for fishing. Right? So that's privacy laws. So sometimes it has to be very broad or redacted in some ways, and that's just the way it is. It's especially common with commercial data, logbook data and things. So the CSS Office, they provide this consensus-based record of scientific results and advice. So these are stock updates, and all the way up to the res docs, the research documents, which is kind of the highest level of review and rigor in those papers. They're often relative to DFO, well, they're always relative to DFO's mandate and work. So it's not necessarily as simple to say, well, I'm tagging these smolts with these predation tags, and I wrote this up, and I just want it published in a quick little document, because that's all a resource. So often the root of this type of work would be to go towards peer-reviewed literature, unless it's directly relevant to something about DFO's mandate. They have an annual schedule, so it is, again, a conduit. If you are involved in a certain type of research and you want to know if it's going to be treated thoroughly by the Government of Canada, you can contact the CSS office and say, is there any discussion of this problem on the books for this year, and behind the scenes they're looking much farther into the future. One thing I've experienced a number of times is people coming to meetings because you can be invited to these meetings, and so people come from outside DFO, and it would be really useful to read and understand and expect a fairly direct adherence to the terms of reference of the meeting. So it's and that's just linked to the mind the mandate caveat again, that the point of the meeting is going to be very defined, and often to the provision of science advice for a regulatory need. So it's a little bit different than what you might experience in other scientific settings. And then I already talked about resource management and what their role is. So they're a main client for science advice, so they'll be the ones putting in a formal request for dock assessment advice for the 2020 snow crab fishery for this region or whatever. So that's their role, and if that is an open conduit for communication with DFO. But just keeping in mind that they request science advice, but they have a lot of other things, legal precedent, and all the other stuff they have on their plate when they are making decisions. By the way, all these photos I put in is just because my talk was really dry looking, so I'm infinitely cooler than this talk would suggest. So I break many propellers a year, and I do other stuff. So this is getting into the getting a job with DFO section. And we've already had, last night in particular, we had to see how did you get where you guys were, right, in the panel discussion. So that's what I mean by non-normal trajectories, and we've heard about it a number of times. Rob's talked this morning, journalist, marine biologist, how do people get where they're going? And I think I'm not unique in saying if you talk to anybody who's kind of stabilized at a place in their career, you ask them, it's very rare that somebody said, that was my plan right from the start, and I just went on that path, and I did it, and that's where I came to. So in my case, I trained to be a police officer right after high school. Some parts of me were suited to it, but other parts were not at all. So I never worked in that field, but I spent 4 years on that. And then I worked as a fishing guide and did that for a little while, and a ski instructor, and thought that would be a great career except for the grand sum total of $12,000 a year salary, so that didn't work out. So then I went back to biology, and so I came here to do my PhD with Jeff Hutchings over in biology. But when I was at the University of Guelph doing my undergrad, for one summer, I had a job with Bill Beamish as a summer NSERC student, and most of the time, if it wasn't electrofishing for sea lampreys, I was cutting them open and taking a little biopsy. These were larval sea lampreys under a microscope, cutting them open, taking a little biopsy of their gonad and sewing them back up. So I maybe did 500 of these, let's say, over the summer. And I moved here, and I moved in with friends of mine who I had known from Guelph, and he worked for DFO in the salmon section. So I finished my PhD, and I let him know, if I ever had an opportunity to meet some people over at DFO, that'd be great, and I was doing a postdoc here with Chris Taggart and Daniel Rosante. And so he called me one day, and he said, we're tagging smolts on the Stewiacke River. Do you want to come out and help? So I thought, great. I'll carry some buckets, whatever. So I showed up, and the lead assessment biologist said, okay, doctor, I've heard a lot about you. What do we do? You just tell us what to do. So I've only started admitting this recently, but I thought, okay, this is one of those moments. I can either say, that was 15 years ago, and I'm going home. Sorry, I was here to carry buckets. But instead, I went back to the truck with a suture, and I stitched a nectarine. I was like, right, yeah, okay, I did it. So I just bluffed it. And I went back, and I said, you know how to do the anesthetic? Mix the anesthetic. You do this, you do that. And we tagged smolts, and the project went well. They got papers out of it, and that was great. And also, I went back to BIO that day, and they said, sit over here, and here's a paper to read that we're working on. I was like, geez, they're really getting their money's worth out of this volunteer day. And they said, come down here and meet this woman. And so I went over and met this very nice woman. She had some paperwork, and I was like, oh, cool. I'm going to get a little per diem, a little honorarium for my work. And I was like, 90 days, casual. So I just signed it, and I called Chris Taggart, and I said, I'm not coming back right away. I got something else going on. So I took a leave of absence, and I never went back. So, it's some of that's luck. Some of it is... I don't know. It's always a fine line between guts and lack of brains, just going ahead with putting tags in an endangered population of salmon when you didn't really know what you're doing. I don't know. Maybe not a good idea. But now I'm back. That's the Stewiacke River, and 10 years later I'm back working there. So that original experience turned into which I'll get into, different levels of being hired, some of which then opened doors for internal postings. And I got one of the last biologist jobs under the last Conservative government before some fairly major reductions, and did shrimp stock assessment for 5 years, and then with the change in government, a new salmon position, this marine threats job became available, so I'm back working there. So jobs with DFO. So do you want a job with DFO? I don't know, maybe you don't. But your academic specialization versus flexibility. That's one of the things that I found as I started there. So they said, well, you're going to do shrimp stock assessment now. I don't. At first, I got really hung up on, I don't think I can do that. I have this very different background, and actually, there aren't that many labs training people specifically for stock assessment. But I wouldn't. I mean, one of the things in some of the talks, you realize very quickly, and that data are data, right? So when you're doing telemetry work, you're using a subsample of a population of data to make inferences about how the rest of that population is behaving. You're doing that. You're using complicated algorithms. You're using models. So there's really nothing. There are some fundamentals of stock assessment science that you should take every opportunity to learn in graduate courses, undergraduate courses on your own. But really, have confidence in the applicability of your quantitative skills beyond the very specialized academic questions that you're asking now, and you'll be fine. So don't worry about that. If you're faced with that, and also if you want to work for DFO, you have to be flexible to doing that kind of work. And some of it's not super glamorous, but I did it for 5 years, even with my seasick hammock, puking my guts out, going out on the boat. But I really, really liked it. I got a lot from it. I was ready to be done with it after 5 years. But the thing is, I can now say, if things change with the government and they're like, oh, we're doing away with the salmon marine threats, then I can say, oh, I've led stock assessments. I've worked with communities. I've done all that. So it's a worthwhile thing to do, and it's a big part of DFO's work. But you have to think about how flexible you're willing to be. And to flip that the other way, there are diverse levels and types of work available. So if you've gotten into graduate work and you think that you may be getting towards, yeah, this was okay, but I want to do something different. If you get into the public service, there's a lot of different work you can do. So that's a plus. There are continued opportunities for skills and career development. Well, fill out these individual learning plans and get to do things like this and more formal courses and things. So that's something that you're just reaching the end of having spent a lot of money paying to train yourself. So why not let somebody else pay to train you for a while? So that I find that a really positive aspect. And then you may be depending. You may not be settled, or maybe you've moved away from family and friends and places you love, and they're working for DFO. Even if you take an opportunity locally, there are opportunities nationally that you can move around a bit. So you have that kind of flexibility, and no fame or riches. But no, it's as all of you probably know, it's a good job. But no, you won't get rich, but it can be a lot of fun. I talked about these different levels already of science jobs that might be relevant here. So the GL man is general labor, EG for technicians, biologists, and research scientists. So in each of those, these are things you can find out, but one little subtlety is that res difference. So the progression through the pay levels is automatic. So if you start as a BI2, you probably start at the bottom, and you would move up through the number of levels of steps, changes with each agreement, but it might be 5 to 8 steps. So you can expect that something like that for 5 to 8 years, you would get an automatic raise up, a fairly substantial raise, and that's the range of the pay, and that just happens. That happens for all those levels all the way through, and then you stop. And you get just cost of living increases. With research scientists, you can actually then apply. You put together a package. There's a committee at NHQ who reviews your progress by a bunch of different metrics, and then decides whether you progress from a Res 1 to a Res 2. But as soon as you progress to that, you begin the automatic step increases up to the top of the range. So that's basically how that works. And there's a lot of talk by HR and staffing people about boxes. So like right now, I'm trying to get them to create a box for me, which would have a BI2 in it someday, hopefully soon, because the smolts are coming, right? So, but it's important because let's say they said to me, okay, you're going to have a BI2 indeterminate, which is a term as close as there is to permanent in the government. So let's say it said to me, okay, here's a box and it's permanent and it's a BI2. and somebody is staffed into it, and they should know that there aren't really mechanisms for changing the levels within those boxes except for the res. So if it was staffed as a BI2, it's not you come in as a BI2 and then you'll move up. You'll move up to the top of BI2, but that box was created as a BI2 because there's a job description for what a BI2 is, and somebody has decided that that is suitable at that level. So nothing is impossible, but it would be unusual based on to just change the box, because there are rules about that. So maybe there are people who didn't apply for that because it was a BI2, but if I make it a BI3 for you, then people could grieve that and say, well, I would have applied if I knew it was going to be a BI3, etc. So just know that if you're applying for something, it's relatively easy to move laterally at that level, but to move up a level would be usually a new application process for you. So this was the what HR sent. It's called Cracking the Code, which is really HR admitting that there shouldn't be a code. It should be simpler. But no, they're just helping. It's actually a helpful video. I'm not going to show it here, but you can check it out. But it's a helpful video because it tells you really some of the things that trip people up as they go through the process of applying. So that's kind of the direct route for getting into these pools and inventories is through the website, and you can watch this video and you go through. So that's their hot tips, right? So there's the website, and there's YouTube. You crack the code. You can all do that. So I think I have equally hot tips to give you, and I'm kind of saying that sarcastically. These aren't really hot tips, but they're things you might try. So if you know somebody who works for DFO, I get an incredible number of emails called In the Loop, and you don't get them. And those talk about things like, oh, there's this new section being created. So there's information, and there's a lot of other stuff in there you've got to weed through. But if you know somebody who gets In the Loop, and I don't mean only gets the email one, but just make that personal connection. But that is one simple thing. I have a few people who've asked me, if you see any BI jobs In the Loop, and I just forward it to them. But just know that they're not always open to them. So sometimes those are internal postings. Don't get frustrated if there's one that you think, oh, that'd be perfect for me, but you already have to be in. So I say these aren't particularly hot tips. These are standard ways to get into any community, right? You make and maintain connections. But one specific one is once you get in some way, move heaven and earth to become a term employee. Because if you're a contract or a casual, you can't apply for internal postings. So sometimes I meet somebody who's on casual, and I think that's 90 calendar days of 90 work days per fiscal year that they can work. And so I know that's coming up. They can't work in that setting anymore, and I think, man, that person is awesome. I know them. I want to move them into this job. If they were a term, I could say, we're going to run this internal process, move you over, as long as it's at level. So term is really the one where you can go directly and have access to internal jobs without having to compete against other people. If you're casual or contract, you're just in the pool along with everybody else, subject to the same process. Still, if somebody's looking for you, they'll find you. But it's so as I mentioned before, almost nothing is impossible, just unusual, frowned upon, or impractical. So things happen that they'll tell you, no, you're a casual, sorry, I have to go internal for this. And then you come back over here to Chris Taggart's lab, and you boot up your computer, and you're like, all right, where was I? And then they call you and say, oh yeah, it turns out it's okay. I don't know what happens, but some things happen. Sometimes it's really squeaky wheels who get the oil. Sometimes it's just they might say they need to go through the process of saying, well, I exhausted the internal possibilities and nobody expressed interest, so now I can go by this route. But just know that just because you hear something is impossible isn't necessarily true. But really, for now, if you haven't, some of you already are already, but focus on that first step of getting into these pools, inventories, jobs, and then worry about exactly what it's going to be and where you're going to move. But that getting in somewhere, particularly at a level that you might think you'd like to work as a term eventually, is really your end game. So so ways that you can be involved, academic collaboration and graduate work is probably one of the best ones, because you're free and I have a slide I think I'll get to about all the things I have to do to onboard somebody to work for the Government of Canada. It's embarrassing. And usually what happens, especially if you work on salmon, is the fiscal year turnover coincides with smolts getting ready to go. So they say, oh yeah, we found you money, and you hire somebody, and you look at what you're supposed to do before, and really it's like, hi, get in the truck, we'll do that later, and you go. But students have their own kind of liability insurance through the university as registered students, so there are efficiencies there, and plus it is interesting, and it does, I mean, that's how I now work with Glenn and kind of why I'm here and things. So that's one way that if you can consider inviting government scientists to be on your committee, those can be ways to make important connections. Volunteering is way more complicated because you're a liability. So there's a lot of risk aversion about having you in government vehicles, about having you out at field sites and things. And we can get insurance, we can work around it, but again, the last thing anybody's looking for is more administrative burden. So it's not really ideal. The best way if you want to do that is usually to join, like for salmon would be to join a river group, like the St. Mary's River Association. That's a big one that we work with, and as part of that group, there's some insurance that's purchased. It's a standard process. But just to say, oh, I want to come out in the boat with you and do some work, you can see it's, mucky and potentially dangerous environment, and so volunteer is not ideal. And then those are the kind of levels. So you might get a contract. That's the kind of base one. Casual is the 90 days you can work per year. So casual, anything you can get to sort of get your foot in the door and make those connections are important. But if you can get to that term one with the asterisks, that's where you have, usually that's the last step before you can make that transition over to indeterminate, and importantly, take advantage of internal postings and movement within DFO, mat leaves. That's how I got in. It was Heather Bowlby, who's the shark researcher now. She went on her mat leave from salmon, and I jumped in. So that's the kind of doors you can get in, and those doors are, so I know some of you are in these inventories, so that's the kind of, so you want a job with the Government of Canada, just give us your name and go through these gazillion check boxes and say yes, 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 importantly yes, that you've done all these things, and you attach your CV. And so that's this kind of broad, like the government's hiring, we want to know who's out there, and we'll take it from there. And then there are position-specific processes. So if they were to generate one of these boxes for a BI2 under me, I could either go to this inventory, and sometimes if it's a very particular job, I could say, no, I'm going to run and post a specific hiring process. I'm going to publish a statement of merit criteria, and if you're signed up for that website from that's in the cracking the code thing, you would find out if you've checked the appropriate boxes that there's this job becoming available and you can apply for it. Both of those can eventually lead to, you'll hear the term pools, so get in them. If you're in a pool, they have different expiry dates and applicability, but usually there's a fair bit of latitude between regions and things, so just get in them. Don't worry too much. You can always turn jobs down, but if you're in a pool, you're in a really good position. So the inventories, those are those dreaded check boxes. So yeah, don't lie. I mean, if you absolutely have no idea what something is, don't say yes. But just know that any no or blank can screen you out, right? So if I'm looking to draw people from inventories, I'll look down that list of 1,000 questions, and it's designed to be, at least in the initial stages, somewhat blind to who's in there. So I don't know the names. I just submit to HR. I say, I want somebody who has said yes to this. And if you've said no to it, I may know who you are. I may be hoping your name turns out, and it doesn't. And that's because you left one blank. So just don't be too humble, I guess, is really, if there's anything you can put in there, because it's a very normal procedure for me to screen people out. So I do a draw from that inventory. I get a long list, and I look down it, and I see, oh, come on, that's not, because in the little box you've said how you meet that criteria, right? So if there's something about fairly complicated and advanced statistical analyses in there, then if I look at it and it says, I did stats in my undergrad, like, okay, I'm not going to hold it against you, but I'm screening you out. That's not what I asked for. But no big deal. At least I saw your name. And maybe I'll see it again later for something else. Maybe I saw everything else that you bring to the table. So try to put positive answers in as many of those boxes as you can and let the rest sort it out. This would be my encouragement. If you go through that process, know also that your interview questions will be set by HR based on the breadth. So right now there's an inventory for EG 4, 5, BI2, BI3. And there's a set of BI2 questions that HR sends to me. So if I do a draw and I get 8 of you people who say, yep, I'd like that job, and I look at it, just know that I could be a halibut biologist, I could be a shrimp biologist, and the questions that I'm going to have to ask you are the same. So just because you see it's a salmon marine threat saying, oh, that's awesome, I'm a salmon guy, and then you sit down for your exam question, you're like, what? This is broadly stock assessment, fundamentals and things. So the inventories are very broad, and some of the interview questions you get will reflect that breadth. I can also add specific questions. So if I look at the 8 people I have and I'm like, that's fine, they're going to answer these other questions, but I really want to know their experience with telemetry analysis. So I can add it. So you may see a specific question, but just know that there'll be very broad ones in there. So when you check these boxes and you get asked from so when I've gone through and I've said these are the 18 things I want out of the many boxes, then you will get asked, okay, tell us how you really meet these criteria. So be generous with your text in there. It's, again, some of the rules we heard about scientific writing. Don't make people look for things. And absolutely never say, yes, I've published, see my CV. You're gone, right? So in those boxes, we need to see exactly the how, where, and when you meet those criteria. So that happens more often, and it seems heartbreakingly to happen when I'm looking for a particular person to come out and they just are in a rush and they don't do a good job. So put in plenty in there and definitely never refer to your CV. Your CV gets attached for me to review. I never look at it. I don't have time. What I'm looking at are your specific responses, and just feed it to me. Here it is. Here's how I meet that criteria. So I think that's it for that slide. Another useful document that you'll see with job applications is the SOMC. That's the Statement of Merit Criteria. So there are sections for education, experience, knowledge and abilities, personal suitability, operational requirements. So you'll see all that. You'll get a lot of information in there. There's more information you can get from that about what to expect about how you'll be assessed, and I'll get to that in the next slide. But one of the things that people almost never use is the contact person. So there'll be a job posted and there's a contact person. Contact them, ideally by phone. It's there, and to me, I look at it as we got a live one here. Like if it's just I checked the box, I kind of want a job with DFO, I'm in the inventory. I had somebody show up at DFO a while ago. They were like, I'm in town, I'm visiting my parents, I'll come over to you, can I buy you a coffee and come over and talk? Like, that's a live one, right? So take advantage of it. It's there. So, and it gives, you never know what information you can trick me into giving you. So, you just have a conversation about things. You're definitely going to benefit from that. And so what you can get from it is really these ones. Education, experience, knowledge, and abilities. So you can kind of predict how you're going to be assessed from those. So your education, if I put in, so I write that statement of merit criteria. If I put in there, I want this education, that means that we're just going to, this is one case, we're going to go to your CV and we're going to say, do you or don't you? It's binary. Experience will be either through assessing your references, because you will say, I have experience with acoustic telemetry, but that is really it's very literal in the sense that we're going to assess that you have that experience. So what you won't be asked is, if it's experience with our code and it's in the experience section, you won't be asked in a test, write some R code. It will be an assessment of your experience, past experience writing R code. If we want you to write it in the interview, it'll be in the abilities section. So if you see experience with R and Python in the abilities section, know that when you get there, there's going to be a laptop around. You're going to be doing something. But if you see it in the knowledge section, it might be, describe the most complex piece of R code you've ever written. Oh, that's knowledge. So those are literal terms, and where things fall within there have a bearing on what you're going to see in the interviews. And I'm pretty much out of time, so I'll just make this my last slide. So what you should know, pay attention to the SOMC. You all do this all the time, communicate at a high level to diverse audiences. If you have opportunities to develop quantitative skills, it's a constant deficiency in people's applications. But know that almost everything you're doing is drawing a sample of data that represents a population, no matter what you're working on in biology. So think about it that way. And from a stock assessment perspective, try to take any stock assessment classes and personal development you can. You can get a lot of mileage about the length of a fish. So that's just a little tip I'll give you about stock assessment, that the length of a fish fits into almost all stock assessment models. It tells you a lot about fish, and you can kind of bluff your way through a lot of questions by linking things back to the length. I know because I've done it. Programming, there's a great audience for that. That's something we're always looking for. And understanding public service jargon. So you might get asked, I got asked once in an interview, write a terms of reference, and I'm kind of embarrassed to say now, I really didn't know what that was. I had never heard it before. And so I could do it if you told me what it was, but you didn't tell me what it was, and so I didn't get the job. So understand some of those terms that come up in the type of work that the public service does. And then we've kind of talked about the rest of it. Get on site, apply standard networking tools, don't be a jerk. Express interest in going beyond your assigned duties, dig in the mud for people, do whatever it is. That was actually one thing I did to get my foot in the door, was exactly that job, get a receiver stuck out of the mud for somebody. And those are the kinds of things people talk about. They're like, that guy's crazy, right? He was digging in the mud, diving down. Oh yeah, okay, well, might like that person around. So yeah, do things like go to sea, you'll meet all kinds of people, help out in the field. So once you're in, those are all pretty standard things. And this one thing I've noticed lately, I'm an old fart now, the young kids, we have some around DFO right now who wear these big headphones. They do their work. They leave at the end of the day. I don't know who they are. I don't know what they're doing. We have other ones who come to the lunchroom, come to the R working group. I know who they are. I know what they're doing. So, yeah, the dad jokes are boring and everything, but come to the lunchroom. We're not that scary, but that's what makes the difference. If you come and we don't know who you are, we won't know to look for you. So anyways, I'll be around this afternoon. You could ask me more questions. I think we're going to be too tight for time now, but thank you very much.